All right, so we're going to continue on our discussion here about chord substitutions. With this one, dealing with contrary motion that exists between your melodic line and what you will create in the bass line. This sort of contrary motion doesn't really have a better name, for it, like tritone substitution or whatever, but it's pretty self-explanatory when we're dealing with the idea of contrary motion. So just a reminder, what contrary motion really is when we're having multiple voices. It can be notes, and it can even be full harmonies, full chords, but they're moving in the opposite direction from each other. So if you look at this first one here, just going up a C major scale, or the first 5 notes of C major, this line is going up, and this the bass clef line is moving down. And so since they are moving away from each other, we're considering that to be contrary motion. Remember, parallel motion, that they continue to have the same interval between them. Similar motion is part of that process too. There's also oblique motion, where one remains the same and the other one when the other one moves. And we can also have contrary motion when our voices move closer together instead of away from each other, moving towards each other. And we see this one here, where we take the same idea and we actually kind of put it here in retrograde, where this line is moving down and this line is moving up. So we're going to take, this will essentially be our melodic line here, and this will eventually become our harmonic bass line, if you will, that we'll build our harmonies off of. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is begin with a melody. This works better when we have a melodic line that moves in a similar direction, at least for a substantial period of time. And so I'm using the opening lines to There Will Never Be Another You, and it starts by moving upwards, okay, and then there's this leap and it moves back down. And so we're going to continue to use contrary motion to reharmonize this, even though we start to move down and actually creating parallel motion or similar motion between these voices. And so what I've done is I've taken, instead of just having an E flat, which I could have had an E flat sustained throughout this these entire 2 measures, followed by a D and a G. And I've begun by starting on E flat here, and there's no real reason for starting on E flat other than this works out pretty well that way, and I've established perhaps the tonic harmony, especially because it's at the beginning of a tune. And I've decided to use a chromatic line starting on E flat, down to D, D flat, C, B, B flat, A, and A flat, and then I need to have a leap that we're jumping down here from A flat to D, this tritone. And we're not necessarily thinking it in terms of a tritone substitution, which we have talked about already, but I just needed to, I wanted to really land here to set up this minor 2-5 to C minor that would happen in the next tune. So instead of just sustaining E flat for this entire measure, I began on E flat and I worked down chromatically and then made a skip at the end to connect to the D half diminished chord. All right, so I'm just going to have you take a listen to what this sounds like here at number 2, where it says we're adding the contrary bass line. All right, and it sounds pretty open and pretty vacant. We haven't added in any other chords, and obviously this E flat major 7 chord does not work any longer when we have all of this stuff going on here in the bottom line. All right, so we're going to need to add extra chords or extra harmonies to deal with that. And so what we've done is, if you could ignore all this fancy stuff up here, I know you want to look at it, it looks super impressive. But I still have this bottom voice moving. It's down in half steps, just like we saw before. And you can look in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen over here, where it shows us the original thing where I put a contrary line, for the most part, between our 2 outer voices. All right, now, again, ignoring all these extra chords up here, I've begun by, I start with 4 voices here, and the addition of extra notes or voices was purely an aesthetic choice. If you were perhaps arranging for jazz ensemble, where you only had 3 voices or 2 voices to work with, it certainly would not be additive, but I wanted to kind of bridge the gap and make sure that we didn't have any large intervals that made the chords seem a little open and vacant. Okay, so let's just listen to this here before we talk about what we did. All right, so some of these chords sound way more sophisticated, way more dense than others, but the point of this exercise was I wanted to actually harmonize every single note in the bass as the root. So I'm not dealing with inversions, which you can certainly do when you're doing this idea of contrary motion and reharmonizing, moving your outer voices in contrary motion. But for this first example, I just wanted to show how we could harmonize all of these, all of the bass notes as functioning as the root, okay? And partly because we haven't talked a lot about slash chords and non-root position chords and maybe all those things that would apply. So if you start out with a simple E-flat 6 chord, moving to a diminished harmony because there's a D in the top voice, okay, and it works out pretty well. It fits in the D diminished, a D-flat sus to C7 sus. And then like a B7 chord that has alterations to it, followed by a suspended harmony. Another kind of altered harmony here with the A7 to another sus harmony. And then our basic, what we saw in the original chart, the half diminished chord going to essentially the 5 of 6 here, but this was going to be going to C minor. But the point is we're trying to harmonize all of this. And so you'll see here that I have a lot more voices. I have 6 voices in this point, and I only have 4 here, and I have 5 here. And so, you know, don't get too worried about why I added all the voices. I wanted you to be able to hear the entire and the complete chord. Now, this looks very complicated, and really in many ways it is. And so, if you were an arranger, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. It would have been a process that you would have worked out. If you were say a pianist and you were working to create this on the spot, it would take some practice and some work to get it down. You might have to write it out. But the idea that my bass line is moving down chromatically all the way down here, and my top line continues mostly in contrary motion until I get to the very end. So just listening to this one more time, don't worry about necessarily all the chord qualities, but the idea that we could create a whole series of interesting sounds over a period of 2 measures instead of just sustaining an E-flat 6 chord or E-flat major 7 chord. All right, great. So now I want you to try and do one of these on your own. I mean, we've just kind of scratched the surface on it. There are certainly a lot of possibilities. In some ways, we will be limited by how sophisticated or hip it will sound based upon how well we have, what our command of harmonic language is. And since we're just kind of beginning in our class right now, we haven't gone into a lot of modes outside of major. We barely talked about modes, but a lot of this can be discovered by you sitting down at a keyboarding instrument and working it out. Okay, so this time I would like I'm kind of setting this note here, this C natural, as a target, and I want to, instead of working from left to right or front to back, I want to go backwards here, and this is going to be our target note, and we want to work down to that note. This is kind of the 3/4 or so of the way through a tune called Bluesette. It's a nice tune. It's a very standard a tune that people perform in jazz. And for now, we're not too worried about. I mean, we have a C flat major followed by a C half diminished chord to F, and instead of resolving to perhaps a B flat chord or of some quality here, it's a D minor, so perhaps a little bit of a deceptive move. But I'm not too worried about what we're doing here harmonically as what we're gonna focus on here. Now, if you look at this line, this begins ascending, and as if we looked before, we talked about it works really well when a line is moving in one single direction. Here we have this peak, which is good songwriting, good melody writing, and then it begins to work down. For our purposes here, we're going to deal with these first few measures. We're not going to necessarily try to do contrary motion here. If we were to do that, we would make sure that our bass line was descending all the way through here, and that when we got to this point, it would move, continue in contrary motion in the other way. So our voices would grow further apart here, and then our voices would grow closer together at the end of the passage. But for now, let's just focus on these two measures. And because I have this C natural in the bass, you can start to work back from C up to here. And what I'm going to recommend, and this is just because it's the example that I created, that you work backwards chromatically in contrary motion, between these voices. So from C, you would maybe have C flat, I'm sorry, D flat or C sharp, and continuing on up until we get to this note up here. So I want you to go ahead and pause the video, and maybe get out a piece of staff paper and see if, just without worrying about creating a whole bunch of harmonies initially, work on creating a contrary line that is moving up chromatically from here. Once you do that, then you might need to spend a little bit of time trying to discover all the different harmonies that you might put here on this A flat, this B flat, this C flat, D flat, and E flat. And when you work on, so you're really going through 2 steps, but when you do this, don't worry about perhaps keeping this A flat as an A flat. You might, at some point here, I found that you're going to need to kind of switch over, have some sort of augmented interval. So it's going to be challenging to read. At some point, who wants to read, double flats and things like that. So just worry about getting the practical sounds in. And so work for step 1, work chromatically backwards. Step 2, then fill in your harmonies as we build up to this C half diminished chord. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can work through that. And I'm going to show you one of my examples, and it's certainly not the only solution for it, but it's just the one that I came up with today. So go ahead and pause it, and when you're ready, hit play. All right. This is kind of a possible solution that I came up with. You'll notice that while we might be tonicizing, perhaps C flat major or going to another harmony, I kind of cut out here. But I have my chromatic bass line going down to the C natural, and my line that's moving in contrary motion, the melody going up here. Now, yes, G flat to A flat, and then to A sharp. Nobody wants to read A flat to A sharp. But then, at that point, I don't know if we would want to be reading an F sharp major 7 sharp 11 chord. It's just going to get a little bit messy. But I want you to listen to this harmony, this harmonic progression here. And just get an idea for what it sounds like, and then we're going to come back and talk about it. All right, so again, ignoring all the enharmonic challenges we might have here. The fish are not judgy. Look at them there. All right, so again, I increase in the last example, you remember I increased voices. This one I tried to retain it as having only 5 notes in there. So in some places my interval gets a little large, and I probably could do a little bit better voice leading. But just putting together this example here, we're moving from a C flat major 7 chord to an F minor 11 chord. Here's the 11, this B flat here in the bass. An E major 7 chord, a B6/9 over D sharp. So here's a slash harmony. This is only implying an inversion. It's not necessarily implying modality in this case, okay? But we have the 9 here, which is the C sharp, and the 6, which is the G sharp. Let's see. And the part of the reason we don't call this a major 7, again, we've talked about, is if you have an A sharp in this harmony, it's going to really conflict with the B natural. All right. So if it's a B major 7 chord, so for all our intents and purposes, when the melody is the root of the tonic of the chord, we'll usually have a 6th in place of the 7th. Then to a D major 7 sharp 11, which is this G sharp. It functions as the sharp 11. All right. And then a D flat 6/9 chord, and I actually have the major 7 in here as well. And then the last harmony, a C half diminished chord, and for later on, this D natural, it's because we're using a motive melodic minor. But this progression sounds much more sophisticated than just having this line go up from C flat major 7 all the way up to C half diminished. Now, let's listen to it one more time, and then I want to make a couple more comments. All right, so if I, as a pianist, or a guitarist perhaps, working with in a live music setting, I could potentially play this series of substitutions when the people I'm performing with are playing the melody. When they're improvising, if they don't have this entire set of substitutions in front of them, it's probably going to be very challenging, if not impossible, to hear all of these chords in real time, especially if the tune is going quickly, which I'm playing the example slowly for you so you can hear all the harmonies. But in a live musical setting, your pulse for this tune might be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And that's an extraordinary number of chords to play through. But the practice of doing contrary motion between your outer voices is really what we're concerned here. And this, again, is one possible solution. I am certain you come up with something completely different. But as long as you made sure that your outer voices, your top voice was moving up and your bottom voice was moving down, you will have kind of really solved the problem or have experienced writing a series of chord substitutions that moved in contrary motion. So that is chord substitutions by contrary motion. You can certainly look for a lot of other jazz standards. Remember, looking for things that move in stepwise motion, continuously in stepwise motion. So if you really enjoy the iceberg here, it's really cold today and we've had about 8 inches of snow. So I was just thinking this was really appropriate. So feel free to watch this video again. Let me know if you have any questions.